I walked into the office that morning, not knowing that everything would change. My husband's affair with his assistant had finally come to light, and he was leaving me. But the twist, by that time, I was already the CEO of his company. As I sat at the head of the table, facing my team, the weight of betrayal hung in the air. I had to fight to hold on to my position, all while dealing with the emotional chaos of a lifetime together unraveling. Before we dive back in, let us know where you're tuning in from. If this story resonates with you, don't forget to hit that subscribe button because tomorrow, I've got something even more special lined up just for you. The email arrived on a Tuesday morning, its subject line simple but chilling. We need to talk. I had seen those words before in different contexts, but never with such finality. In that instant, I felt the ground beneath me shift. My husband had left me. After 50 years of marriage, of shared memories, love and struggles, he had walked away for someone else, his assistant. I couldn't understand it. How could it happen? The woman he'd been spending so much time with, the one I'd often dismissed as just another face in the office, had now taken everything. The years of loyalty, the trust we'd built, the sacrifices I'd made, all of it seemed irrelevant now. It was as if the life I'd known had been erased in a single, cruel moment. The first few days were a blur. There were no tears, no loud confrontations, just an overwhelming sense of disbelief. Every time I reached for my phone, hoping for some sign that it wasn't true, the cold emptiness of the reality hit me harder. He was gone. She had taken his place, not just in his life, but in our company, in the very world I had built beside him. I had spent so many years supporting his career, his dreams, while mine were put on the back burner. Now, he had thrown it all away, and she had moved in to take over. I had been there for him through thick and thin. I had helped build his business, put in the long hours, supported him when he faced setbacks, always putting his needs above my own. We had always talked about our future together, about retiring together, enjoying the fruits of our labor, but now, that future seemed like a distant, painful memory. The shock of it was worse than the anger. I had expected a conversation, an explanation, something that would make sense of the situation. But there was nothing. Just a message, a cold farewell, and the certainty that my life was about to change in ways I couldn't yet understand. I didn't know where to begin. Everything I thought I knew about my life was now in question. I could feel the weight of the house pressing in on me, the quiet, empty space that had once been a symbol of our shared success, now tainted by betrayal. I stood in the foyer, staring at the large portrait of us from our anniversary celebration a few years back, the smiles frozen in time, so confident, so sure of what we had built. The irony stung. There was no way to turn back the clock, no way to erase the damage he had done. And then, something else occurred to me. A sense of cold, controlled anger began to replace the numbness. I had spent my whole life building his empire. But what about mine? Hadn't I been contributing? What had I actually been giving up all these years? The answer was clear. I had been giving up everything, and in return, I had received nothing. Or so I thought. Just when I thought I had nothing left to hold on to, I remembered something. Something he didn't know. Something I had kept hidden for years. The realization hit me with the clarity of a sharp knife. My position as the CEO of his company was far from accidental. It wasn't just a title I had inherited from him or a role I played as his supportive wife. I had been the architect behind our success. The reason the company had reached the heights it did wasn't solely because of his leadership. It was because of mine. He had always treated me as a side player in his grand story, but I had been more than that. It was time to remind him of that. The betrayal had awakened something inside me. I wasn't just the grieving wife in a broken marriage anymore. I was the CEO of a multimillion-dollar corporation. I had power. I had control. I had a seat at the table. The game had just changed, and I wasn't about to sit on the sidelines and watch him walk away with everything. I had a choice to make. I could crumble under the weight of my emotions, let his betrayal consume me, or I could take control of my future. For the first time in years, I saw a path forward. It was a dangerous path, a path that could lead to even more heartache, but it was the only path that promised a sense of justice. I wasn't going to let him ruin me. The first step was figuring out exactly what he had taken from me, and how I could take it back. To truly understand how I got here, you need to know the full picture. It wasn't always like this. There was a time when we were partners, not just in business but in life. We built our dream together, piece by piece. The company wasn't just a business, it was a testament to our love, our ambition, and our shared vision. When we first met, I was working at a small advertising firm, trying to make a name for myself. He was already an up-and-coming entrepreneur, full of ideas and dreams, just starting to build what would become a tech empire. We met at a conference, both presenting ideas to a room full of investors, and I remember the way his eyes lit up when he spoke. He was passionate, driven, and he saw potential in me. It didn't take long before we were inseparable, working late nights, collaborating on projects, and eventually becoming a couple. It was supposed to be a partnership, the kind where each person lifts the other higher. And at first it was. But over time, things started to shift. His ambitions grew, as did the company. The early days were filled with late nights and endless hours spent in front of a screen, building, strategizing, brainstorming. I had my own career aspirations, but as his business began to take off, I found myself putting those aside to help him. There were meetings to attend, decisions to make, strategies to develop. I was the behind-the-scenes support, making sure everything ran smoothly. It was a sacrifice, yes, but it was for us. Or at least, that's what I told myself. I believed that one day, when the company reached its peak, we would both share in the rewards. That we would enjoy the fruits of our labor together. But it wasn't long before I realized something had shifted. He became more distant, more consumed with the company's success. And I, too, was getting lost in the machinery of it all. I never resented the work, never resented the sacrifices. I knew that we were building something that would last, a legacy. But what I didn't realize was that while I was dedicating everything to the company, he was slowly distancing himself from me emotionally. His late nights at the office became more frequent, his trips for business more prolonged. And through it all, I continued to support him. I had always been the one to stand by his side, cheering him on, offering advice, pushing him to be better. But I had never asked for anything in return. The company grew into something bigger than either of us had imagined. We went public, expanded internationally, and became one of the leading tech firms in the industry. The money was never an issue, but as the company thrived, so did his ego. And the more successful we became, the more he seemed to need validation from outside sources, especially from his younger, vibrant assistant, who had started working with us just a few years ago. I didn't think much of it at first. She was just another employee. But over time, I began to notice things. The way she would linger around him during meetings, the private conversations, the sudden closeness between them. I dismissed it. I trusted him. After all, we had been together for decades. He would never betray me, not like that. But then, things started to change. He started delegating more responsibilities to her, taking her out on business trips while I stayed behind. I tried to convince myself it was all in the name of the business. He needed someone to take care of things while he focused on the big picture. But deep down, I knew I was being pushed aside. Slowly, almost imperceptibly, she had become his right-hand person. It wasn't until one late night, when I happened to overhear a phone call between them, that the truth hit me like a slap in the face. They weren't just colleagues, they were something more. The soft whispers, the laughter, the intimacy in their voices. It was clear what had been happening. I confronted him the next day. It wasn't an explosive argument, though I wish it had been. There were no angry words, no slamming of doors. He was calm, collected, almost too calm. He told me it was true. He had been seeing her. 4 months. He had fallen in love with her. In that moment, everything I had built, everything I had believed in, seemed to shatter. The man I had trusted more than anyone, the man I had given my life to, had betrayed me. And worse, he was leaving me for her. He didn't even try to explain why. There was no apology, no regret, just the cold, hard reality of his choice. He had made his decision, and there was no going back. But I couldn't help but feel as though something had been stolen from me, not just my husband, but my identity. I had spent years building his empire, but in doing so, I had lost myself. I had sacrificed everything for a future I thought we would share, and now it seemed like that future was being ripped away. But even in my pain, there was a flicker of something else, a sense of clarity, of determination. I realized then that I had been more than just his wife. I had been the backbone of this company. While he had been the public face, the charismatic leader, I had been the one holding everything together. Without me, he wouldn't have reached the heights he did. I had a choice. I could fall apart, let his betrayal destroy me, or I could rise from the ashes and take control. And for the first time in years, I knew what I had to do. The future he had stolen from me wasn't gone, it was mine to reclaim. And I wasn't going to let him or anyone else take it from me. The days after he left were a blur of numbness, each one blending into the next. The house, once filled with the laughter of family, now felt like an empty shell. I wandered through the rooms, trying to process the loss, trying to understand how everything had unraveled so quickly. I kept seeing his face in every corner. His shoes by the door, the scent of his cologne lingering in the bathroom, the way he used to leave his jacket on the back of the chair in the dining room. It was suffocating. How could everything that felt so permanent, so secure, be so fragile? He didn't even ask me to fight for him. He didn't give me a chance to try to make things work. It was like I was already irrelevant in his eyes. The woman, his assistant, had taken his place without warning, and in some twisted way, I knew it had been happening for a while. But the finality of it, the coldness of his departure, was a shock I couldn't have prepared for. I didn't go to work for a few days. I couldn't bring myself to. The thought of walking into the office, where I had always been the dutiful, supportive spouse, now felt like an unbearable weight. What had once been a place of pride, a symbol of our shared achievements, now felt tainted. I had always been content to take a back seat, to support him in his role, but suddenly, I was expected to navigate this alone. The company was his life, and for the first time, I was no longer sure where I stood in that world. The days dragged on, each one blurring into the next, until I could no longer avoid the inevitable. I had to return to work. The company needed me. I needed to face what had happened, even if I didn't feel ready. I knew that if I didn't show up, if I didn't face this head-on, I would lose everything. My position, my sense of self, my dignity. And that thought terrified me more than the betrayal itself. The morning I walked back into the office, the air felt different. It was colder, more sterile, like the walls knew something had changed. The team greeted me with mixed expressions, some with sympathy, others with awkwardness, and a few with barely concealed curiosity. It was hard to look at them. The office that had once felt like a second home now felt alien. As I stepped into my office, I was greeted by the familiar scent of coffee and the hum of activity outside the door. But all I could think about was the man who had once shared this space with me, the man who had now taken his leave without so much as a backward glance. I sat behind my desk, my fingers lightly brushing the papers before me. My first instinct was to pick up the phone, call him, ask him why. But I knew it wouldn't do any good. He was gone. He had made his choice. I spent the next few hours in a haze, going through the motions of what needed to be done. Emails, meetings, decisions. All of it seemed so distant, so irrelevant. But as I moved from one task to the next, something inside me began to shift. I had spent so much of my life in his shadow, supporting him, helping him build this empire. Now, for the first time, I saw the truth. The empire wasn't just his. It was mine too. The more I thought about it, the more I realized how much I had contributed. I wasn't just his wife. I was the backbone of this company. I had made decisions, steered projects, managed teams, and solved problems. But somehow, I had always let him take the credit. I had always been content to play the role of the supportive spouse, the quiet partner in the background, while he basked in the spotlight. Now, in the wake of his betrayal, I saw how much I had sacrificed, how much I had given up. But it wasn't too late. The company was mine too. I had a seat at the table. I had helped build this. And no matter what he thought, I wasn't going to let him take it all away from me. The realization was like a spark in the dark, a sudden burst of clarity. He thought he could just walk away, take everything with him, leave me behind in the dust. But I wasn't going to let that happen. I had spent years being overlooked, being the quiet partner, the one who stayed behind the scenes. But now, it was my time to step into the light. I picked up the phone and dialed the number I had been avoiding for days. My lawyer. It was time to start planning. The company wasn't just his. It was mine too. And I wasn't about to let him walk away with it. As the conversation went on, I began to feel something I hadn't felt in days. Power. I had a plan. I had the resources. And I was going to make sure that everything I had worked for, everything I had sacrificed, wasn't taken from me without a fight. I hung up the phone with a sense of resolve. It wasn't over. Not yet. This was far from over. And I wasn't going to let him destroy me. I was going to take control of my future, and I was going to do it on my terms. The road ahead wouldn't be easy. It would be messy, complicated, and painful. But I was ready. I had to be. The company was mine, and I wasn't going to let him, or anyone, take that away from me. The betrayal was only the beginning. The real battle was just getting started. And this time, I wasn't going to back down. It was a week after the confrontation when I realized the full extent of what had been happening behind the scenes. At first, I thought it was just the betrayal itself that stung the most. The suddenness of it, the way he had walked away without a backward glance. But as the shock began to fade, another, more insidious truth started to surface. I had always thought of myself as a behind-the-scenes player in the company. I'd been content in that role, building strategies, managing day-to-day operations, solving problems, all while letting him take the limelight. But now, as I dug into the company's financials, I saw something that made my stomach drop. It wasn't just that he had been having an affair. It wasn't just that he had left me for her. No, it was far worse than that. While I had been working tirelessly, focusing on the growth of the business, he had been making a series of decisions that put the future of the company in jeopardy, decisions he had kept secret from me. At first, they seemed like small discrepancies, odd changes that didn't quite add up. But as I dug deeper, the truth became clear. He had been moving money around, shifting assets, and making deals that were designed to benefit him, and her, at my expense. I wasn't just a wife who had been betrayed. I was now a business partner who had been strategically sidelined and financially undermined. He had used my trust, my loyalty, to further his own interests, while I had been left in the dark. The worst part was that I had been so focused on supporting him, on building the empire, that I hadn't even realized the full extent of his manipulation. He had set it up so that when the time came, he could simply walk away, leaving me with nothing but the wreckage. As I sat in my office, staring at the spreadsheets, the weight of it hit me. The numbers didn't lie. He had been planning his exit for months, if not longer. The moves he had made, the decisions he had kept from me, were all carefully orchestrated to ensure that when he left, he would take everything with him, and leave me with the scraps. I should have seen it sooner. I had been too focused on the day-to-day operations, too focused on keeping the company running smoothly, that I hadn't seen the cracks in the foundation. I had trusted him, blindly, without question, and he had used that trust to build a trap. But there was one thing he hadn't counted on: me. I had been silent for so long, watching from the sidelines. I had let him take the lead, let him take the credit. But now, as I sat there, reviewing the documents that exposed the full scale of his betrayal, I knew I had a choice. I could let him have everything, the company, the wealth, the life we had built, or I could take action. And then it hit me. I had something he didn't expect: knowledge, power, control. While he had been busy plotting his escape, I had been quietly building my own foundation, one he had never noticed. The company was mine too, and I had the resources to fight back. I had always been involved in the financial side of the business, always been the one to keep everything running smoothly. The legal team knew me. The board knew me. And while he had always treated me as an afterthought, I knew the ins and outs of the company better than anyone else. There was a clause in our original partnership agreement, one I had helped draft, one that he had likely forgotten about in his haste to secure his future. It was a clause that protected my interests should anything ever go wrong, something to safeguard me in the event of a betrayal or dissolution of our partnership. It wasn't a clause that would keep me in charge, but it was a clause that would make sure I wasn't left destitute, that I wouldn't lose everything. But the twist was even deeper than that. As I dug further into the financials, I discovered another startling revelation. During the last few months, my husband had been funneling money into accounts that weren't just his. They were joint accounts he had set up with her. Accounts that I had no access to, accounts that he had carefully hidden from me. It was clear now that he had been planning to make her his partner, not just in life, but in business. He had set her up with a stake in the company, without my knowledge, and had been preparing to transfer power over to her once he walked away. She wasn't just his assistant, she was now his business partner, and he was making sure she would benefit from every decision he had made. But the final twist came when I realized something else. It wasn't just the company he was trying to steal from me, it was my future. The money, the assets, everything I had worked for. The betrayal wasn't just emotional, it was financial, a carefully orchestrated plan to strip me of everything I had earned. I could feel the anger building inside me, but it wasn't just anger, it was a cold, calculated resolve. I wasn't going to let him take everything. Not without a fight. I had worked too hard, given up too much, to watch him walk away with everything he had stolen from me. I had a plan. A way to turn the tables. I knew that with the right legal moves, I could expose what he had done, could force him to answer for his actions. But more importantly, I knew I could use his own tactics against him. He thought he could manipulate me, thought he could take everything and leave me in the dust. But he didn't know who he was dealing with. The woman, his assistant, she had no idea what was coming. And neither did he. I wasn't just going to fight for my company. I was going to fight for everything he had tried to steal from me. And I would do it on my terms, using the very tools he had tried to use against me. The game had changed. The stakes were higher than I had ever imagined. But I was ready. For the first time in years, I was ready to take control. The days that followed were filled with a mix of strategizing and quiet contemplation. I knew that I couldn't rush into anything. I had to be patient, methodical, and, above all, precise. The betrayal had been devastating, but I wasn't going to let it define me. I had spent so many years living in his shadow, letting him take the reins while I supported him from behind. Now, it was my turn to lead. I began by getting in touch with the company's legal team, carefully selecting the few I could trust, those who had been loyal to the vision we had built together. They were shocked, of course. They had all known me as his wife, the person who had been quietly behind the scenes, but never in the spotlight. Now, they saw me differently. The once distant CEO who had been too busy to get involved in the decision-making process was now taking charge, and they didn't question it. I carefully reviewed every document, every contract, every deal he had ever made, every business decision he had kept from me. It was like peeling back layers of a rotten apple, each layer more decayed than the last. The more I uncovered, the more the full scale of his betrayal became clear. I had seen the signs, of course. The strange transactions, the unexplained absences, the way he had treated me like a bystander in the company that we had built together. But seeing it all laid out in black and white was something else entirely. The financial embezzling, the secret accounts with his assistant, the deals made without my knowledge. All of it pointed to a deliberate plan to walk away from everything we had worked for and set her up as his equal in the company. But what he hadn't counted on was my experience, my knowledge of the company, and my quiet but unshakable will to win. I moved swiftly. I had already prepared for a worst-case scenario, knowing that if things fell apart, I had the right to take legal action. I wasn't just going to let him walk away scot-free, leaving me with nothing. The terms of the partnership were clear. Any attempt to undermine my position or my stake in the company would trigger a legal response. He had been so caught up in his own ego, so blinded by his affair and the promise of a new life, that he didn't consider the strength of the foundation I had helped lay. I made my move. I reached out to the board of directors, informing them of what I had uncovered. I wasn't just a grieving wife anymore. I was their CEO, and they had to respect that. I laid out the facts, the financial discrepancies, the hidden assets, the manipulations that had been carried out without my knowledge. I made it clear that if they didn't act swiftly, I would be forced to take matters into my own hands, using every legal and financial tool at my disposal. I had done my homework. I had already contacted forensic accountants and legal advisors who were ready to move quickly. This wasn't just a fight for my marriage. It was a fight for my company, for my future. The response from the board was immediate and intense. They were shocked, but they also recognized the severity of the situation. They knew I had been a key player in the company's success, even if they had never acknowledged it before. They had underestimated me. And now, they were paying attention. Within days, the board scheduled an emergency meeting. The walls seemed to close in as I walked into the room, knowing that this would be the turning point. He had no idea what was coming. He thought he could walk away from it all, take the company and everything with him, but I wasn't going to let him. I sat at the head of the table, feeling a strange sense of calm wash over me. The betrayal still stung, but there was no time for weakness. There was no room for second-guessing. I had a job to do. The board members sat around me, their faces tense, knowing that the next few hours would determine the future of the company. The meeting began, and I wasted no time. I presented the evidence I had gathered, transactions, emails, accounts, all of it pointed to the same conclusion. He had been planning his exit for months, undermining me at every turn, setting himself up with her, thinking he could run the company from the sidelines while I was left to clean up the mess. I made my case clear. The company needed to move forward, with or without him. I wasn't just going to sit back and let him destroy everything I had helped create. I demanded that the board vote to revoke his decision-making powers and seize control of the assets that had been misappropriated. It wasn't easy. There were moments of tension, moments when I feared they might side with him. After all, he had been the public face of the company, the charismatic leader everyone knew and respected. But as I spoke, something shifted. I wasn't just the wife anymore. I was the CEO. And I was taking charge of my own future. When the vote came, it was unanimous. He had overplayed his hand. The board, shocked by the extent of his betrayal, voted to remove him from the company and take steps to protect the company's assets. The company was mine again. I felt a weight lift off my shoulders as the board confirmed that I would remain as CEO, taking full control of the company moving forward. There was no more question about my role or my authority. It wasn't just about the company. It was about reclaiming my sense of self. I had been manipulated, betrayed, and hurt, but I had risen above it. I had taken back what was rightfully mine. The hardest part was still to come. I had to face him. I had to confront the man who had betrayed me, the man I had loved for so many years. But I wasn't the same woman I had been when he first walked out. I had found my strength, and I was no longer afraid of losing what I had built. I called him. His voice sounded distant and almost apologetic as he answered the phone. He had no idea that his world had already crumbled around him. "I'm sorry," he said, but there was no conviction in his voice. "I didn't mean for it to happen this way." But I wasn't listening. I had heard enough. I wasn't the woman who would silently accept his betrayal anymore. I wasn't the wife who had blindly supported him for years. "You don't get to apologize," I said, my voice steady and firm. "You don't get to take everything and leave me with nothing. The company is mine now. You've lost everything you thought you had." And just like that, I realized, this was the end. The man I had loved was gone, but so was the woman who had silently stood by his side for all those years. In her place was someone new, someone who had fought for everything she had, someone who had taken control of her own destiny. The finality of it settled in, and I felt something I hadn't felt in a long time, peace. The journey wasn't over. There was still much work to be done, but I had taken back what was mine. I had fought for my future, and I had won. The future was mine to shape, and I would do it on my own terms. And that was the most powerful victory of all.